Join me on the Business Immigration Benchmark, where I tackle all the immigration and global mobility challenges head on and provide direct, practical solutions. Follow us on Spotify and join the conversation.
I've been in the mobility space, I started off with U.S. immigration over 24 years ago. I literally started doing U.S. immigration 3 weeks before 9/11. So for me, change is part of the role. Like Kristen, it's also part of the reason why I've been engaged in mobility for so long. You include people, there's always going to be different factors, even if you see the same case over and over again. So the reality is it's never the same day twice. And I've embraced it, right? Change is growth. So with that said, also like I'm a history major, so I look at it from a historical background and looking at it from the perspective of, okay, we knew last November that there was going to be a lot of change coming up this year. So I try to preemptively manage that change. I feel very blessed to be working for a company whose tagline is build for change. So everybody is already on board with that mindset. And then working within that mindset, learning what my barriers are. So like what the business is willing to do and how to maneuver within that business model for all of our employees in an equitable way. So remaining agile is, I think, is imperative to remain afloat in this changing time.
One tip to moving to assignees to the Netherlands is make sure that you meet the criteria that's put out by the government. The government is very clear on what they expect and what they need. And so to do the homework first about what the criteria is to make sure that you meet the criteria. And also, there's a lot of documentation that has to be submitted along with an immigration application, a highly skilled migrant application to the authorities, to make sure you do your homework of all the documentation you need to submit, the apostilles that are needed, when the apostilles can happen, the translations that are needed. It's a lot of documentation, but it's totally doable. It's totally achievable.
You need to have very clear, effective communication, and then everything has to be summarized in an email. So all stakeholders on both the home and host side understand what's going into each phase of the process.
Global mobility stays relevant by remaining agile and closely connected to business needs. Our role is to help organizations navigate regulatory changes while enabling them to move talent where it's needed most.
And I can go next if that makes sense. Sure. So, hi, everyone. Again, Carolyn Volosek with Cox Automotive. I sit in Cox Auto, but support the enterprise. So if you haven't heard of Cox Automotive, you may have heard of Cox Communications or Cox Enterprises in our newest division, Cox Farms. We are in everything. About 40, across all of our divisions, probably about 45,000 people worldwide. And we support the global mobility, domestic relocation, and immigration for the enterprise. And I think for the 2026 so far, when Andy gave us this prompt, it was hard to believe that we are only in April. It seems like 2020, it seems like this could be a mid-year review, right? It just seems like 2026 has been a long year so far. And Mirella, I kind of mirror when I was putting together my notes, kind of what we're seeing and what we're looking at is that there is so much more of a focus on compliance, whether it's immigration compliance, whether it's tax compliance, where you really have to be able to back up what you're doing and why, because everything is being questioned, and you're running into, more RFEs, more audits, that you're being called in to support. And at the same time, while there is more of a lens on compliance, and things may seem to be getting more restrictive, there's still a need to move people, right? We're still seeing talent gaps in certain locations and in certain, jobs and things like that. So while compliance isn't closing the door altogether, right, that door is a little bit narrower, right? And it's a little bit harder to get through. So what I've seen, and what I'd be interested in hearing what everyone else is doing is, how is global mobility really getting more involved in the conversations up front, and not necessarily coming in at the back end to help get your employees from point A to point B. But I see global mobility taking more of an active role in really determining, how do we design the role to get the people in that role, where, the location strategy, how are we supporting? So I really see not necessarily global mobility being looped in kind of post-hire, let's get them to where they need to be, but really being involved up front and inside of that decision. How are we designing these roles? Where are people sitting? What roles are they in? So I would be interested to see if others are also seeing that. And if you're being called on to be even more strategic, then I would say then we have been, right? I think we've started to see global mobility become more strategic and built in to the hiring decisions. But I think now more than ever, there's an argument that we should be brought in earlier to really help determine locations, jobs, where our people need to be, in the most compliant manner.
We have definitely earned our seat at the table, especially the last several years where we've taken on new work, whether it's been remote work, business travel. I think to keep the seat at the table, we have to stay agile and innovative. I'm always looking for continuous improvement opportunities within my program that align to business objectives that will either improve employee experience or reduce cost. I'd also recommend collaborating across departments, ensuring that others are knowing the work that me and my team are doing. I think it's critical to bring them along on the journey. It's easy for us to get bogged down in a silo, and we're not doing ourselves any favors. I always recommend going on a roadshow and highlighting the great work that you're doing.
I guess global mobility is like a behind-the-scene engine that never sleeps, an invisible engine that enables employees to work and live across borders seamlessly, covering immigration, tax, compliance, relocation, moving, and ensuring a smooth and supportive experience for both the employees and their families, but also for the companies, for the businesses.
I think the one tip that I would give is to make sure that you stay on top of different immigration changes, and then set the right expectations internally with stakeholders and especially with the employees. I think we've seen in the US, especially, every 4 years or maybe a little bit longer, but when we have a change in the president, a lot of the immigration policy can change. And I think that's definitely a really nerve-wracking thing for employees. And so being able to give them whatever information you have is going to be key to making sure you have happy stakeholders and happy employees.
So one top tip is hard because there's so many great tips that you could give to someone who's moving. But I think for folks who are going on assignment or relocating, it's really important, the aspect around the family support and who the family is and who's moving with them. And I think you just can't underestimate the importance and the success of that. So whatever kind of support you can provide for the family, including your furry family, I think is critical to success.
Getting into global mobility is always different. I think all the stories I've heard are different. So basically, Some people say it was by accident. They don't even know what they were signing up for. Sometimes it's from tax, from immigration, from vendor side. So it's really different. Mine one was actually through Russian language, which is quite surprising. Might sound surprising. I was studying Russian literature and linguistics and business communication at the university. And I was looking for a job basically with a Russian language knowledge requirement and a couple of other skills and experience I had that time. And the company that I mentioned that I started to work with was looking for someone with Russian, because when I was supporting the global mobility function, I was responsible for Europe, Ukraine, and Russia. So it was important to have someone who is able to communicate in English and in Russian as well with the both zones. So it started with Russian, and then it grew into global mobility, and then now it's clearly global mobility itself.